This is On Target Institute, building men of character, men who will live a life that demands an explanation. And now, founder and president, Vince D'Acchioli.
Man, how you doing? It's so good to be with you again and for our second session of On Target Institute's leadership training. A reminder, if you have not already downloaded the leadership manual, it is available at otm.co. I really want to encourage you to do that so you can follow along with us. In this session, we're going to be talking about the responsibilities of an OTI leader. In our last session, you may recall, we dealt with qualifications. We talked about the 5 non-negotiables. And we also had a list of things we are looking for in leaders. We ended that session by talking about the application form and the uniqueness of that form and some things for you to consider as you move toward becoming a leader with On Target Institute. And this session has to do more with your responsibilities, specifically as a discussion leader. So let's unpack those. Let's begin by talking about your duties. First, you need to be available to attend all of our weekly meetings. It's very important as a leader that you set the example and that you're there every week. If you're not able to be there, that you have maybe an assistant leader that can help out with that. You have to arrive. We're asking you to arrive 15 minutes early at least to greet the men in your group. Very important that you set the standard again to be there early. We want you to attend the scheduled training and equipping sessions that we will have, probably at least monthly, for you to be sharpened in your leadership skills. We also may have an annual leader retreat that we're going to ask you to attend as well. So that's something that you need to consider. Well, this is probably the most important thing that we're looking for in a leader of a group. We're going to ask you to contact every man in your small group every single week with a non-agenda phone call. We'll unpack that a little bit more in later sessions, but every week you need to call every man in your group with a non-agenda phone call. It's just like, hey, Joe, how's it been going for you this week? Maybe you remember some notes from the actual group discussion time, and you can ask them how you're doing with what you committed to last week. I will also recommend that you start your phone calls with the men who were not there, because we don't know. They could be facing some challenges that you may not know about. Also, you might find it that it's necessary to meet separately with some of the men in your group who may have special needs. If you've got a man in your group and there's not enough time in your session to deal with it, you got to be prepared to meet separately. Maybe have a cup of coffee between your meeting times weekly. In preparation for the meetings, here's what we're going to ask you to do. You need to pray. You need to be praying for every single man in your group every single day. That is something that is very, very important. We want you prior to the meeting to also be looking for visitors and greet them warmly. Remember that many may be non-believers, and avoid overt and overly spiritual talk. We're trying to create an environment where men feel safe. They can come in and we're not just talking in language that they don't really understand and that we only understand as believers. Mingle with the men and not with other leaders. This is a temptation that oftentimes we have as leaders. We see other leaders that we meet with in separate meetings and we want to gravitate toward them. No, mingle with the men, mingle with the broader group, and don't just gravitate to the leaders. And most important, be an encourager. Try to encourage as many guys as you possibly can. Again, it's creating the right environment. During the teaching time, this is very important. You should be watching the men in your group. The teacher may come up with something and all of a sudden you're going to look for some nonverbal signs. Maybe the teacher talks about an area of having to do with forgiveness and you notice that one or more of the men in your group kind of cringe a little bit, and that tells you that maybe they're dealing with some things that you need to know about later and ask specifically, hey, I noticed that you kind of reacted to something that the teacher said. Tell us a little bit more about that. Because again, oftentimes it suggests a particular point of need or struggle that you may not know about. So watch for those nonverbal signs. During the discussion time, Ask the men to openly address the discussion questions. Be careful not to drift off of those discussion questions if at all possible. Ask them specifically to address the questions. Ask if there are any personal illustrations or stories that they can relate to the rest of the group, having to do with what it is that you're talking about in the group. Try to get every man involved. Later in the series, we're going to do some actual role playing and talk about the dynamics of a group and how to deal with different kinds of counterproductive roles that you'll find in group dynamics. But try to get every man involved. Draw them in. Watch for those who may want to talk too long and remind the group to be sensitive to the time that you have. Watch for anyone who may be hurting. Sometimes there are guys hurting, and I know as leaders sometimes we have an agenda. We want to get through the discussion question, but all of a sudden you may notice there's a guy in your group, he's got a little tear welling up in his eye, and guys, that tear may have nothing to do with what the discussion will be about in that session. It may have nothing to do with what's being talked about, but there may be some very real hurt going on in that man's life that happened that morning or maybe a few days before. You have to be willing as a leader sometimes to move off of the agenda to deal with something very serious, or you may be in a position where you could suggest to that man, you know what, I want to know more about that. After the meeting, let's spend some time together and deal with it then. But please don't let anyone out of that environment who is hurting without dealing with it. Again, we'll teach you more about how to balance that tug-of-war in a group dynamic in a later session. Finishing the discussion exercise is second to meeting the needs. Please remember that, guys. This is very, very important. Also, allow enough time to pray for specific needs. Always allow enough time. When you see that the time for discussion is winding down, maybe it's a 5-minute window or even longer, allow enough time to pray with and for each other before you dismiss your group. Challenge the men to write down 1 or 2 specific action items that they may have gotten from your discussion that they can process over this next week. Because new behaviors that they may want to enter into as a result of the lesson, those are the things you want to encourage them to write down. And then offer your phone number or email address for anyone who may need to contact you during the week. We talked about that in our last session, the importance of being available to these men 24/7. And remember that this is not a counseling session. It's very important that you remember that, but rather an opportunity to hear relevant information and to discover how to apply it to real life situations. Let them know how much you love and appreciate them, always, as many times as you can during that discussion time. And the general kinds of ideas are, remember that your goal is growing disciples. You want to have the kind of environment where men are actually going to grow and blossom. Be on the alert for men who may have matured and are ready to assist or host their own table. Again, this gets into training leaders behind you that can come and either take your place if you're not there on a given week, or be ready if the group is beginning to grow beyond 6 or 8 guys, be ready to maybe to start another table. So be on the alert for those men. That's part of your responsibility, is to grow leaders. Look for powerful testimonies that might be appropriate for the whole group to hear. You might have a man share something in your group and you might think to yourself, you know what? The leader of On Target Institute needs to hear this, because maybe it's something that the entire group really needs to drill down on. So be on the lookout for that. Now, let me finish this session by talking about a special admonition that we find in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 3, 1-10. Let me read it to you. It says, "Here is a trustworthy saying. If anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. Now, the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church or God's flock? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders, and so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Deacons, likewise, are to be men worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, and not pursuing dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience, and they must first be tested, and then if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. I share that with you guys because I think it's a text that we should go to often as a reminder of what God is calling us who are in leadership to be. We need to model it. It's been said that you can teach what you know, but listen, guys, you reproduce who you are. And that's what men are going to be looking at. Now, in our next session, we'll be dealing with OTI's on-target facilitation model, a powerful session dealing with 4 areas of tension that exist in a group that as a leader, we're going to help equip you to be able to manage. I'll just give you an example. There's the group tension between the practical and the spiritual or the prayer emphasis. There are some groups that all they want to do is pray, and believe me, prayer is important. And there are some groups that resist prayer, and all they want to do is be practical and come up with solutions and kind of fix it formulas. And that's not good either. There's a tension that exists there, and as a leader, you've got to be able to balance those tensions in a group. We'll also give you a tool that'll help you weekly, if you want to use it, determine on a scale of 1 to 10 perhaps how you did in that group discussion, and you can actually hold the members of your group accountable by using that tool. So I look forward to unpacking that in our next session. Until then, may God richly bless you, men.